The topic we're going to be talking about today, looking at the ranking of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. Some of the information we are following is that SDG performance in Africa varies significantly, and with the most recent data released, recently, we understand that countries like China, like Tunisia, Kabul, Cape Verde, and of course Algeria often are leading, while countries such as South Sudan and Central African Republic consistently rank among the lowest in the latest ranking. Progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals is generally slow and facing stagnation, with some key goals like peace and justice, and of course other factors that seems to be responsible for this low ranking for the attainment of these Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. Now, one of the latest issues, one of the latest factors that analysts have discovered that is said to be responsible is the COVID-19. Well, most nations in Africa, 5 years after the COVID-19, I think that should not be an excuse anymore. Because what some African leaders are saying is that the COVID-19 drew African back. So while other nations of the world were making progress in attaining these SDGs, most countries in Africa, lacked behind because of the effects of the COVID-19. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, viewers out there, once again, join me to welcome our guest on the program today, Nowita Egbotako. Nowita Egbotako, nice to have you one more time on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, then. All right, so let us, look at the Sustainable Development Goals. It's been on for quite some time. Something that the United Nations came about some few years ago and, talked about. And the agreement was that finally, that by 2030, if you are a country on the planet Earth, and if you have not attained this set of development agenda, set of development goals and all that, your country will be considered as not a developing country. Now, we have just 5 years to 2030, and the latest ranking is that most nations in Africa are not even near it. As a matter of fact, we understand our beloved country, Nigeria, has not even hit about 30% in their ranking. Now, what would you say is the sole factor that seems to be responsible for this non-compliance to the set of SDGs that we are talking about?
Well, the problems are not far-fetched because all over the continent of Africa, we have leaders who are missionless. Most leaders in Africa are missionless. The wishes and aspirations of the people at heart. Regrettably, most African leaders are self-centered. They don't have the interest of the majority of their people at heart. And the political situation, the electoral situation in most capitals in Africa do not provide the space, the opportunity for missionary leaders to emerge on the scene. What we have are leaders who are incompetent, leaders who are not interested in the so-called development, sustainable development goals. How can we have sustainable development goals in Africa where you have leaders who don't have development programs? No programs. A country, for instance, for Nigeria, for instance, cannot move forward in leaps and in bounds without a coherent development program, a coherent agenda, comprehensive for that matter, that will take the people out of poverty. We have multifaceted, multi-dimensional poverty all over Africa. Okay, look at the report coming out from the United Nations, for instance, talking about Cape Verde and Tunisia. Why in Black Africa, most countries where West Africa, they are nowhere to be found. Nigeria as a case study. Nigeria as a case study. The kind of leader that I can emerge on the people's choices they are not carrying the people's mandate, because what we have in Nigeria, for instance, leaders who seem to force themselves on the people, because the electoral system is questionable. And that's what you see in most countries in Africa. We have leaders who doesn't have coherent ideology. You cannot develop without coherent ideology. You cannot move your society, your country from the dungeon of poverty, for instance, without a development program. We used to have a development program in Nigeria, for instance, in the 60s, in the 70s. The military will come up with development programs. But what we have in Nigeria, for instance, there's no development program. You cannot go anywhere without development program. For instance, China, that has become the second largest economy in the world, next to the United States. They started with development programs. When the Chinese leaders came in October 1949, they saw where they are coming from, and they swore to take their country from the ashes of underdevelopment. That is why China has grown in leaps and bounds today. But in Africa, in most countries in Africa, what the leaders in Africa, they are no focus. There's no development agenda. And any society, any leader without development agenda cannot go anywhere. Okay, look at what is happening in Burkina Faso now. Recently, Burkina Faso is a typical example of a country and a leader that is interested in taking people out of the dungeon of poverty. We have a country, we have a leader in Burkina Faso, for instance, that is taking the people, that has development agenda, that have programs, that is silently moving the country forward. A Burkina Faso leader, for instance, has refused to be within the ambit of Western powers, Western capitalist countries. A Burkina Faso, for instance, has decided to take the bull by the horns. How many leaders in Africa we pinpoint that are serious about issues of development, sustainable development programs? Evans, let me ask you, how many leaders can we pinpoint, apart from Burkina Faso, Traore in Niger, and somebody in Chad? We can do this scan all over Africa and check. So Africa cannot meet the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals because most capitals now in Africa are being populated by leaders who have no mission, who have no agenda. The fact is there. America got to where America is today because you have Sustainable Development Program. You have leaders who come up with ideas. For instance, when Obama was in the White House, we saw what he did. We saw the kind of things he put in place, Medicare and all that, Obamacare and all like that. Do you have fantastic agenda coming from African capitals? No. We have leaders who are ready who are more or less interested in in building their own capitalist nest. Who believe in bogging trousers and bogging stomachs. Who do not care a hoot about the people. They are supposed to govern. The people who have surrendered their sovereignty to them, they are not interested in taking those people to anywhere. So how can you pursue? How can you get nearer the so-called Sustainable Development Agenda initiated by United Nations when a leader or most of the leaders in Africa are not visionary? They are not missionary. They cannot look beyond their nose. We have issue of corruption. Corruption has become a monster. Corruption has become an issue. It has become an albatross.
Now, you may want to know some of the SDGs, what they are. As at 2015, the United Nations, reduced everything to about 17. Before 2015, we had more than almost about 30 of the SDGs. But by 2015, the United Nations had to reduce it to only 17. So the 17 SDGs that are otherwise known as Sustainable Development Goals are, it is expected that by 2030 that the issue of poverty and hunger would have been a thing of the past for most nations. So ending poverty and hunger, and of course ensuring basic needs are meant for everyone by 2030. Then, of course, we have the one that has to that talks about improving health and well-being. That is promoting healthy lives and universal access to quality healthcare for most nations by 2030. That is improving health and well-being by 2030. What it means is that most nations of the world are expected to have improved tremendously in healthcare delivery by 2030. So the big question that we ask is, where is African nations in all of this expectation? Then providing quality education and gender equality for nations of the world by 2030. Just as I said a while ago, the big question we ask is, where are African nations in providing quality education? Now, take it, for you to actually understand when we are, bringing it back to African nations, is look at Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria is a ready example that we can, actually made in all this explanation. So ask yourself the question, where is Nigeria today when it comes to quality education? How accessible is quality education is to Nigerians? In other words, how Nigerians can, what is the access of quality education to Nigerians? I mean, we still hear of ASU planning to go on strike. And of course, we still hear how quality education is very, very expensive in Nigeria. So it goes to show that perhaps Nigeria may not even be close to quality education, even as we approach 2030. Then we also have the one that has to do with ensuring clean water and sanitation and energy. That's making essential resource available to everyone. Now, the issue of quality water and clean water is an essential resource and must and should be available to everyone by 2030. So that is what the United Nations expects, that by 2030, most nations of the world, I mean, for you to be considered to be a developed nation by 2030, you should be ready to make available natural resource to everyone in your country, and that water happens to be in that regard. One of the reasons why Africa may not have been able to attain some of these expectations as expected by the United Nations, the SDG goals, is because of the effect of COVID-19. I mean, we may be 5 years ahead of, have passed the era of COVID-19 now. So if that is correct, that COVID-19 was a huge blow to African continent. So should we go ahead to maybe blame our leaders for the non-attainment of these SDGs?
For me, our leaders are the ones to be blamed squarely, because if you could remember, during the COVID-19, it was not that serious, in Africa. COVID-19 was more or less, an alien thing that we heard happening in Europe and America. It was not that prevalent. People were not dying, people were not dropping on the streets, just as we see in America, in New York, and you see in other parts of the world. So COVID-19 is not an excuse, even 5 years after. The excuse lies on Nigerian leaders. The excuse lies on African leaders who have refused to take who have put misgovernance, on their radar. They have misplaced priorities. You said not quite long ago that even ASU is threatening to go on strike. Education is still in shambles. Education is underfunded, in Nigeria, for instance. There's no pipe-borne water. Most people resort to digging their own boreholes. I have boreholes in my compound. Most people are doing above boreholes. There's no social net. The people are on their own. The government's on its own. We have a pathetic situation all over Africa. Nigeria is a case study where you have a crop of leaders who are not interested in the welfare of the people. It is so sad. It's a sad situation. Because when you have leaders who just as I said earlier, who are not missionary, who are not visionary, who don't have a coherent development agenda, then you cannot talk of education. You cannot talk of providing health facilities. Okay, the other day, Nigerian health leader died. Muhammadu Buhari, for instance. Somebody who was an SA to the president was saying it was okay for the president to President Muhammadu Buhari to have gone to London, to UK for his medical treatment and things like that. That Nigeria could not provide such an insult coming from such a statement, such misguided statement coming from an SA to Muhammadu Buhari, saying that Buhari did well by going to UK to pursue his health agenda. Given the kind of resources we have in Nigeria, given the kind of resources we have in Africa, my brother, Africa is sitting on bottomless pit of resources. It is sad, it is pathetic that less than 5 years to the so-called date set by the United Nations, Nigeria and most African leaders are still nowhere to be found. It is excruciating. It is sitting. It is annoying. That even most annoying thing about what is happening presently is that the Nigerian leaders, for instance, African leaders are not even interested. You don't see the urgency. Okay, since I also have tried to go on strike, well, what has come from the leaders of Nigeria? What are they talking about? Funding, the Nigerian universities. Not a single statement has come. Actually, also threatened recently. Education is in shambles. Our healthcare system is in shambles. People cannot take care of themselves. The government is not. The government is not proactive. The government does not have an agenda to take the country and its people to the next level. It is so sad. How can development take place when corruption is an issue? Corruption is an issue, my brother. The other day, a governor in a country, for instance, in Nigeria, had an issue with the EFCC, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Instead of the government of the day to prosecute such a leader, but such a leader was given an option to either decamp and say your sins are forgiven. How can such a country develop? How can such a society
let us...
you cannot blame COVID-19 5 years after. COVID-19 is not to blame because the COVID-19 did not even affect Africa and Africans so much. People are not dropping on the streets of Nigeria, like people are dropping in New York, in Wisconsin, and the rest places. So it's bad governance, misgovernance, misplaced priorities being pursued by African leaders who are not interested in a sustainable development agenda. It is so sad. It is even more sad that it has to be the United Nations that has a certain agenda for Africa. What we have to face states all over Africa. Face states. For me, Nigeria is a face state.
Anyway, Nowita, let us come off that now and let's be guided with our responses. Nigeria is not a failed.
We cannot fund our education.
Yeah, Nowita Ebutako.
No water for the people. The people are. You look at the exchange rate for the dollar. When Nigeria is producing petroleum products, Nigeria myself, you know me and myself, we are struggling to fuel our cars in the midst of abundance.
All right, so Nowita, I need to respond. I need to respond to what you said, that Nigeria is a failed state. Nigeria is not a failed state.
More like a failed state. It's my comment. It's not your comment.
Anyway, away from that now. But Nowita Ebutako, let us talk about the goal, the one that has to do with climate change and temperature.
Yes.
Is one of the goals of the SDGs. And now, the factors of climate change and temperature is not caused in African continent. I mean, the Western world, may be responsible for that as a result of technology and all that. Now, I think it is also expected that we should be careful when we blame African nations, blame African nations for our inability to react to climate change and temperature. I mean, the factors of climate change and temperature, like I said a while ago, is not caused here. So we're just victims of it.
Even as we are victims of it, but is there any proactive action being taken by African leaders to take us from the dungeon of misrule, dungeon of poverty, mass poverty, hyperinflationary trend? We don't have to go far talking about the climate change and what are you talking about? the people have been abandoned. Nigerian people surrender their democracy, their sovereignty to a set of people who have simply abandoned them. Agreed, because as an expert in international politics and international relations, I know most of the problems we are facing in Africa was caused by new colonialism, imperialism, and all that. But we have countries in Burkina Faso, for instance, we have a leader who is showing an example that you can develop your country even in the midst of colonialism, in the midst of neo-colonialism, in the midst of imperialism, in the midst of imperialist agenda. A small country like Burkina Faso, even Niger, Mali, these are countries that are doing fantastic. They are coming up with fantastic ideas. They are trying to get out of the April spring of imperialism. What are we talking here, Evan? The fact remains that we have leaders who are not serious of taking their countries to the next level. Corruption is an issue.
Okay. All right.
If a country wants to develop, you need to take proactive action. How did China get to where China is? I'm talking of China, for instance. Even the so-called Soviet Union, you are calling it a superpower today. We know where Soviet Union was in 1917, in 1920s, before the Second World War. We know where Soviet Union was. We know what those leaders did. They embarked on industrialization program, massive industrialization program that now brought development to those countries. But we don't see such ideas coming from African leaders. What we see is corruption, we see misgovernance, is an entire state, for instance, had to decamp a political party because that political governor doesn't want to be persecuted. Your sins are forgiven. So there's nothing you want to tell me, my brother. Africa, to get close to sustainable development program, the leaders must come to face-to-face with reality.
Okay. All right. So
coming face-to-face with realities is develop your country. Look at the insult coming from the White House. Look at what Donald Trump is doing to Nigerians and Africans. Talking about birthright issue, talking about immigration issue. If Africa and Africans are developed, will people be running to America and those places? Answer me now. It's because there is misgovernance, misplaced priorities. Nobody is talking about how to develop the country. Okay, it's only Kebaj and Tunisia that are even getting close.
Yeah, no, which I go. Yeah, no, which let us refresh the minds and probably the memory of our viewers out there by running through these sustainable development goals from one, like what I said a while ago, that before 2015, the United Nations had more than 30 of them. But as a result of development and all that, so the sustainable, these goals were further collapsed into 17. A while ago, we saw some of them, like the one that has to do with poverty. It is expected by 2030, no nation should be considered to be poor. Zero hunger, then good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitization. Then we also have affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth. Then we also have industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, that's the one that we're trying to explain a while ago. Then life below water, life on land, then peace, justice and strong institutions. Now remember that the SDGs actually started with the Millennium Development Goals. I remember before the break of this millennium, that's before the break of the year 2000, it was said that just as the 2000, the millennium came, it was expected that most nations of the world would have achieved some set of goals before the new millennium. But it's been 25 years after the new millennium now, and we are talking about the SDGs. So you see that the SDGs somehow carry over leftovers of those development goals that most nations of the world could not attain by the year 2000. So the United Nations had to stretch it further to the year 2030. And by 2015, the United Nations further went ahead to reduce all the set of goals to about 17 of them, and we ran through them a while ago. Now, it also interests you to know that these SDGs have some features What do we mean by features? It has some characteristics. In other words, it is expected that the SDGs is supposed to be integrated. In other words, that most nations of the world are supposed to be integrated within the confines of the Sustainable Development Goals in such a way that it becomes a major identity, for nations of the world to be known with. In other words, if we are talking about quality education in the US, we should also be expected that it is also being replicated in Nigeria, because that is the expectation of the United Nations, by ensuring that it is actually a call to action, from the United Nations, by expecting that nations of the world should attain this set of goals by the year 2030. So it is integrated in nature. Then also it is also universal. Universal in the sense that it binds the whole world together. It binds the whole universe together, as it were. Then also one of the features of the SDGs is that it leaves no one behind. In other words, it leaves no country behind. I mean, it's a call to action for all nations of the world that they should key into it and expect that they should be parts of the SDGs. Then one thing that we also need to know, it is that it is not actually binding. In other words, there's no really a legal framework, for it. In other words, the United Nations will not take a nation to court. The United Nations will not persecute a certain nation that is found lacking in the attainment of the SDG. In other words, if we are saying that SDGs in Nigeria is still very low, the United Nations will not take Nigeria to the International Criminal Court of Justice. So you see that it's actually not a binding, it is just suggestive in nature. It's a call to action by the United Nations that, hey, by 2030 you should be attaining this in order for your nation to be considered to be in a developed nation. Then also, one of the features of the SDGs is that it is being monitored. It is silently being monitored. It is not as if actually that United Nations come to your country to come and say that, let's look at the books. Can we actually say this about your nation? No. But somehow, the SDGs is being monitored by the way your country is being perceived globally. Take, for example, some nations in Africa, how they are being perceived in outer Africa, in the outer space. I mean, you can even see from the brain drain syndrome, the way most Africans leave Africa, the shores of Africa, and go to the Western world. So you see, it is as a result of the non-attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in search of greener pasture, in search of moving to other nations of the world where Africans can find these things, then it goes to show that it is being monitored. I mean, Africa is being monitored by the way Africans behave. So it goes to show that Africa as a continent is really not close to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a pity that we couldn't have Nuita Ibutako anymore. We're going to look at the remaining 5 years, whether it will be enough for Africa to really attain this. And one thing that stands clear is the need for us to improve on our leadership, issues in Africa, because one major issue that seems to be responsible for the non-attainment of this SDGs is the lack of good leadership. There seems not to be a good leadership direction in Africa, so that is a major problem. So not until we improve on our leadership issues, then we may not be close, and we may not even attain the SDGs by 2030. And that's a sad one. If by 2030 most nations of the world have attained it, then we are not close to it. It shows that Africa as a continent may not even be ready for development. All right, so we'll leave the discussion here today so that we can have another topic same time next week. I want to say a very big thank you to you for watching this program today, and also to say a very big thank you to our guest, Nuita Ibutako, even though he couldn't continue with us on the program. My name is Evan Sunohuge. Until same time next week, goodbye and God bless you.